Hello and welcome to this roundtable discussion about The Havoc of Choice, a novel by Wanjiru Koinange. I'm really glad to be joined today. I'll start with my extreme right by Ngala Chome. Ngala is a researcher who is working on the post-colonial history of the Kenyan coast, including recent manifestations of violent extremist politics in Kenya more widely. In 2013 to 2014, he was the Commonwealth Shared Scholar at the Centre of African Studies, University of Edinburgh in the UK, where he graduated with a distinction. In 2015 to 2016, he served as lead researcher at the Nairobi office of Sahan Research, where he led multiple countering violent extremism research projects, focusing on Nairobi, Mombasa, and northeastern Kenya. His work has been published in peer-reviewed journals, academic volumes, and in policy reports. And his work also covers diverse themes, ranging from the politics of elections, development, devolution, and religious extremism. He is currently a final year doctorate candidate at Durham University in the United Kingdom. Karibu, Ngala.
Thank you.
We're also joined by John-Allan Namu, welcome, who's a Kenyan investigative journalist and the co-founder of Africa Uncensored. He's been a journalist for 16 years and is based in Nairobi, from where he reports on issues and events in Kenya and the region. He has interviewed high-level politicians and power brokers from across the region, which we'll be speaking about, and investigated crimes committed in the highest reaches and lowest rungs of African society. John-Allan was a 2015 and 2017 Joint Journalist of the Year at the annual Journalism Excellence Awards and a 2015 Global Shining Light Award finalist and the 2009 CNN African Journalist of the Year. He's also a 2009 CNN Fellow and a 2017 Archbishop Desmond Tutu Fellow. He holds a BA in Journalism from the United States International University, which is also where our author, Wanjiru Koinange, went, and also Muthoni Ndonga. Asante for joining us. Muthoni is a well-known name in our entertainment scene and the creative economy in general. She's a singer and artist who refuses to be boxed by standard definitions. She's a self-confessed polymath. Her body of work is a timeless, thought-provoking, genre-bending, Afro-diasporic sound that has roots in reggae, dancehall, neo-soul, hip-hop, and of course African drum patterns. A live performance juggernaut, her shows embody flawless choreography, costuming, and delivery. Often musing on the human condition, the state of women, and her hometown of Nairobi, Muthoni's wealth of music knowledge and showbiz know-how is unparalleled. She's also at the helm of festivals such as Africa Nouveau and Blankets and Wine, in addition to being a singer. Karibu, Muthoni.
Thanks.
And last but not least, we have our author, Wanjiru Koinange, who's also a publisher, and who I have the deep honor of calling my co-founder at Bookbank. She's a writer, as you all know, a restorer of libraries through Bookbank, and an entrepreneur. Is based in Nairobi, and this, the novel that we're discussing, is her debut novel, and is based on the events surrounding the 2007 Kenyan general election. Her writing has also been published in several journals and magazines across the continent, including Chimurenga, Slipnet, and Commonwealth Writers, where she served as a cultural correspondent for East and Southern Africa. Wanjiru also explores ways in which art and creative production can be used to influence social change, and as I mentioned, she's a co-founder at Bookbank, where she directs efforts to revitalize some of Nairobi's most iconic public libraries. Karibu sana, Wanjiru.
Thank you.
And I will be moderating this conversation. My name is Angela Wachuka. I'm the co-founder of Bookbank, where we work on restoring public libraries in Nairobi. And I'm also a founding member of the Creative Economy Working Group, where we work on policy issues related to the creative sector. And I was previously an Arts Management Fellow at the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, and just this year completed my program at the Obama Foundation as an Africa leader. And I also have the pleasure to have published Wanjiru Koinange via our new outfit, Bank Books. Karibuni, all of you, to the conversation.
Thank you.
I'm really looking forward to digging in.
Yeah.
Because I know this is a very, as equally a heavy as it is an emotive topic, and in true Kenyan fashion, maybe a conversation that we don't have as often as we do, which is really deeply puzzling. So I will begin by having a discussion with you, John-Allan, because obviously one of the fascinating things that you have in common, in addition to having gone to USIU with also Muthoni, it seems to be a great university churning out.
All that was the same time actually, because we shared classes.
Churning out quite
a
variation of people. So of course, in addition to having gone to the same university, you also both studied journalism. And looking at your body of work, John-Allan, which is vast, has been about investigative journalism. And earlier, we were having a brief conversation about how investigative journalism can kind of form the backbone for the sort of fiction that Wanjiru has released. So I wanted to maybe have a conversation from that perspective. As an investigative journalist, your kind of perspective about having journalism as a background in order to issue this kind of fiction.
Well, you know, the great thing about journalism is that it, over and above covering things on a daily basis, or investigating them long term, is you get to understand the nuance behind certain things, right? So if we're talking about the post-election violence, I was just speaking with Ngala before we started this conversation. There's so much that we observe, so much that we write about, we're on TV talking about, but a lot more, winds up on the cutting floor, right? A lot of the stuff that we, wouldn't make it into a bulletin or wouldn't make it into a story are the things that now become the bones of a really good investigative book. If I was to give an example from this book, it's the entire family drama between Kavata and Ngugi. As a family who are in the center of this whole political thing that's going on. As journalists, we'll observe it from the gates of the Ngogis, as they did, right? But what people don't often see is that now nuance of the family drama, with someone perhaps struggling with something more difficult than just presenting themselves as a good candidate, as a viable candidate. Those are things that journalists observe. And those are things that journalists, even if they don't, observe, can interpret and interpolate and then draw out to make a very, very good narrative. And it happens the world over. And one of the things I must say is that when we were having a conversation before me joining you here, I asked Wanjiru what, because it felt so realistic, it felt so tethered to what I had seen, that she must have lived through it. It was very surprising to hear her answer. So I guess that's the long answer to your question. I think I'll stop there because we can talk more and more about this.
I'm actually curious about what her answer was.
That she researched it. Rather, so I mean, every Kenyan has their own experience of PEV and 2007. But that her research was, yielded itself into a book like this. It kind of gives you an inkling into the kind of writer that you are, right? And it's really, it's an easy read, and for a person who lived through it, who experienced it, who wrote, stories about it, and who met people who, you see glimmers of chapter in some of the people that I met. I was blown away by the fact that she wasn't, kind of writing from her own lived experience.
I think that's super interesting also in relation to a conversation that we've been having on and off for some time. A while ago, it may have been maybe 5 years ago, Dr. Joyce Nyairo, we were having a conversation with about the kind of body of work that has been produced around this violence in 2007. A few years before that, Billy Kahora, who was the editor at Kwani, had asked in an editorial this question of what are the defining texts of this period. And Marjorie Oludhe Magoe had responded to say, I think contemporary writers should go back a little bit, because she could cite like 40 years worth of thematically that kind of focus.
Yeah.
What do you think has shifted here in terms of the kind of work that we're producing that helps us to make sense of that time?
Well, time itself, right? In as much as we are, a number of years away from the actual events of 2007, I think time has been the most important factor in allowing people to sort of draw, from themselves and from other experiences, the ability to write.
Right.
That being said, I feel as if this is one of the, well, for me, it's one of the first works of fiction that I've read that speaks directly to that point in time, which tells me that we're not over that period, right? Yeah. But that's one of the things, I think it's the only thing for me that makes the most sense. It's because everyone has such a personal experience about it, being vulnerable enough to write about it in such a way that your truth, or even if you're writing works of fiction, reflections of people's truth are seen in the book, is also a very scary thing. But I think that time has allowed us to kind of shift away from our insecurities and our hang-ups about what happened in 2007. And we're also speaking to a new generation of people who were, 10, maybe even younger, when this was happening, right? The median age in Kenya is 19. So if you think about 2007 and 2020, that's something that they saw on TV, but really didn't, they didn't internalize.
Right.
So reading this for them is also now helping them make sense of the things their parents were saying, and so there's that freedom artistically, I think, for people to express themselves to a generation that won't be as judgmental as us, because of the fact that we all lived through this.
And has that period informed the kind of lens that you've been using to look at your work?
For sure. Again, we were talking with Ngala before this, and I was telling him about the time that I joined the newsroom was right after the 2005 referendum, when a lot of the stuff that we saw in 2007 onward kind of started being brewed then, right? Yeah. In this incredibly contested referendum that split government right in the middle, and formed the basis for this juggernaut of an opposition versus this very, conservative government, as well as informing some of the perhaps more negative tropes and narratives that became part of the 2007 election. In the newsroom, what it felt like was observing people kind of preparing for war. And you'd often think that the newsroom is the most neutral place and space where the kinds of ideas that you hear outside kind of don't filter through. Right. But that was the exact opposite, right? So without going too much into the story, I lived through that period and became very jaded about the kinds of things that people see on TV vis-a-vis how they're created. There's a lot of manipulation, right? And not in the marionette kind of way that people think the media manipulated. When someone says something, we just report it. No, it's much more insidious. Right. Ngala told me, of course, this is a global phenomenon, but when it comes to the way our politics is practiced in front of everybody and through the media, for sure, that it left me feeling kind of jaded. But secondly, and I think most importantly, it completely changed my idea of power in this country. Right. And how it's interpreted in the media. And so the majority of the work that we do is focused on the public, on the public interest, and trying to reframe that relationship of power by speaking about those issues and giving that voice to the people who actually live through or at the sharp end of problems. Because when you're at that, part of the stratosphere as a politician or as a leader or a captain of industry, everything seems very theoretical, very bland, very easy to move around as I would this glass, right? But it's a completely different kettle of fish when you look at it from the point of view of the people who are living through that. That is the problem with 2007, from my point of view. The problem is we have never gotten over it because the people's experience of it is it's a toy.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So you will have someone who's lived through a very traumatic experience, being paraded in front of politicians to speak their truth, say never again. But the reason that they are there is not the reason that they think that they are there. It's to play something completely different. So in terms of informing my view on journalism and my worldview generally, 2007 was pivotal. It can't have, you know, I don't think I could have lived through anything else that would have shaped my journalism as 2007.
Wow. Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
Asante.
We're going to return when we have an open discussion because I think there's a lot to unpack there. Thank you. Muthoni. Donga. Muthoni drama queen. Thank you for joining us. We actually invited you on to offer a perspective from a kind of pop culture world. And we were having a conversation and actually you had very strong feelings about the characters in the book.
Yes.
Would you like to talk a bit about
I'm happy
that?
to talk about some of that. So I was saying to Shiro that when I was reading the book, there was many details that I had skipped. Overall, the second reading, like I was saying to Ngala, hasn't changed, but now there are things I noticed. So for example, when Goge was selecting people for the houses, and there was like these three characters. So there was the Changa seller, and you know, where she wanted the house because she needed to keep her business going, but she didn't want her kids involved. I was like, that's a movie. Like that's definitely a character in a movie. Or the commercial sex worker who, you know, had finessed some of her clients and now had like windfall money and she needed to move. The guy who was being beaten by his wife and he was tired of the rumors, and I found all these like really interesting colors. Amani's personality, like when he was walking around the house giving stickers to everybody. And I really like those people, and it seems to me that that could be whole stories and it's a lens to see the world. And so in the middle of this like really interesting and sometimes very complicated book, there's just all these little moments of personality, and I find that so fascinating. And that anybody can plug in, right? So like if you live in Accra or like you live in Cape Town, you definitely know that woman who's like brewing changa to keep her family going. And she's never really, you know, we never really hear those stories, and I think that those are extremely interesting. Yeah.
I get the sense that you read this book very deeply.
Look at the panel. I had to prep.
I think another conversation we had was about the choices that the characters in this book make, and again how strongly you felt. I suppose about like the havoc of it, the havoc of choices. Yeah.
I mean, so I was saying to Shiro, I mean, Kavata, come on. Where was she when all that stuff was happening to Amani? Just there, just being angry. I'm like, several years ago, you should have just used your voice and like used your brain. If you didn't want this story out, of course it should have been complicated, but that should have been the time to make. You don't like kind of enjoy the benefits of this guy being your dad, and then now I'm so upset, I'm so bored with her. I'm just like, stop it. You know, so of course when Scholar did for her, usionyeshe watoto hii tabia. It's like, exactly. Ooh, mama anafanya nini?
You could see the lip movement.
Yeah. And I fully approved of Scholar's behavior, and that's why Mrs. Muli insisted. I actually have a lot of respect for Mrs. Muli. She made her bed. She's in it, she like owns it, she's not embarrassed about her choices. There's no conflict within her, you know, and I thought that was interesting. Thuo, I understand his trauma, you know, that's that was a lot. And when you think about the context of Kenya, all those people who've experienced, you know, systemic violence, those things have never been resolved for Kenyans. So I do agree with you, John-Allan. When you look at it from the lens of people who have lived through those experiences, it's a different ball game. It's why he's going to submit, and then also his ambitions from Kubwa. I'm just like, though, whatever. Chepto, that's my babe. I like that she had fire, and it gave me the reminder, you know, that in so many places it's really women who hold the world up, and Chepto for me is one of those characters. I really enjoyed that. Wanja, I love that babe. Stay scheming. I feel like that's it, you know. If your parents are not going to listen to you, right? Yeah. And I also understand why he couldn't have listened to her when you look at how our families are set up. You know, maybe now our generation will change, but at that point, I can't imagine that he would have listened to her saying all those things. So I was like, you just go get your money, boo. And, you know. So the characters are really interesting, and I really want to applaud you for that. I found the characters very interesting, and I really want to see this thing visually. I think it's really, it will make a really good like film.
From your lips.
Yeah.
Thank you, Muthoni.
Absolutely.
Another area that I thought was kind of twinning in life moment was, I think Wanjiru and I were having a discussion about how in your own work there's a lot of kind of peripheral perspectives that you bring into the center, like, you know, your latest release, like album, Susie Noma, women's perspective, you know, that kind of lens, which is deeply, deeply endearing, I do have to say. And so I thought that that might be an interesting thing to speak about in terms of your connection to the characters. Because one of my favorite things maybe has to be that you get so many perspectives about what's happening in 2007, but from very many different people. And when I first read, I think the first draft, again, I was, you know, Kavata was the center of it, right? But upon like reading it a few more times, you understand actually that she isn't. And so I started to really enjoy and want to know more about people like Scholar.
Exactly.
Yeah, and Chepto and their backgrounds. Could you talk a little bit, please, about that?
Thank you for that question, because that's actually how I really feel. On the second reading, I'm like, first this Kavata babe, she's occupying too much space in this story for nothing. The Jay-Z and Beyonce. No, and Beyonce, please say no evil against Beyonce. I just think the way,
That Beatles.
and that's that on that. I just think it's the way life and stories are framed. It's so easy for us to see life through the Ngugis and through the Honorable Mulis. I think that's also how the national dialogue has always been constructed around sort of this, the big boys and, you know, the winners. And we kind of see the wives, we don't really care, but maybe sometimes they can be there if they're entertaining. And we forget all the rest. We really are the Ngugis. I mean, the Thuos and the Wandras, all these forgotten people whose voices are not really heard, the Amanis, the collateral damage of people's, you know, actions and choices. And I think that generally my perspective is that we are way more, and the union only holds if we are saying yes to this union, even this thing called whatever, you know, that was just imposed on us just the other day, less than 100 years ago, right? It's our choice if the thing is meant to work, at least in theory, right? So those are the stories that are more interesting to me. It's way more interesting and not just interesting, but I really feel it's important to give space for that. That's how people will start to see themselves, and that's how people will start to remember themselves, that actually they are the center of the story, and not these other guys who like own the media and have, you know, control of the narrative. Actually, they're just participants in the story, and we really are the main, you know, everybody's out here trying to do it for us. It's for the people. I want to lead the people. I'm like, okay, so maybe we should focus on the people. And I think when we do that, we find ourselves, we find character, we find personality, we find like real things, right? So you have a woman who is selling changai doesn't want to show it to her children. That's natural, that's normal, that's none of us in the room would want to do something that will make our children think less of us, for example, right? And I think that when we do that, we make space for ourselves and we start to control this narrative, and even if it's for like 1 minute, it feels like you are the one with the power. And I think that's the beginning of freedom, when people are able to start to internally grasp, believe, and exercise their personal power.
Asante.
Ndivyo.
I think you also wanted to read a section for us.
Sure.
Yeah?
Should I just pick any section?
Your favorite?
Okay.
Give me some suggestions.
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
You know, it's a Sunday.
but-
Read the Sunday one. Have a read
Yeah.
the Sunday one.
Nairobi on a Sunday?
Nairobi on a Sunday in the early. Yeah.
No, I went over there. Wait,
Power,
it's
you do.
coming. I know it is. Ngugi is such a clueless guy. This guy is so basic. What's that? Ugh, I can't believe him. What is that? I guess maybe John-Allan is the one who's come the closest to that, seeing people who like hang around, like, because the politicians always have the guys who hang around, the proximity to power thing. Because when I kept thinking, there's no way this guy ruined your whole life and you've gone back unless like you believe his power can somehow magically transfer to you.
Stockholm syndrome.
You think that's what was happening?
Yeah. When I read it, I was like, I've seen so many people who are currently, not even at yesterday, who are currently Ngoges,
Oh, yeah?
worshipping Mulis. Oh yeah, just look at the political landscape right
Yeah.
now.
I thought about that as well.
Yeah.
I was thinking, was it because he was climbing as well, and so pleasing the big man, and
Well-
also kind of just accepting that you know this is how things are anyway.
I don't know. I felt like it wasn't resignation as much as it was kind of almost blind naivety about his situation, right? So yes, there are people who are ambitious, and you can tell from the moves that they make that they are climbers. But this dude
I
was
see.
like,
Okay.
He wasn't a
he's
climber.
changed.
Okay.
Yeah,
This is why, in some ways, honestly, I was like, you deserve it, Ngugi. First, good on you for not listening to your wife, then your kid. Then how come you didn't have a pal? Why couldn't you dial a pal and be like, this guy who framed me, do you think he's a snake? He deserved it.
So maybe
Kwende.
everyone joining us from home, we are reading, Muthoni is reading a section from chapter...
I'm on page 130. I'm in chapter, because also Anne is the bomb. I really like her. 24th of December, Dear Ngugi, chapter 6.
So this is the day before Christmas. Let's go.
When Anne has come to deliver the news.
Not bad.
I really like Anne. She has a lot of personality. I liked also that her story didn't end up in a fairy tale. I like that. I don't like. I was a bit surprised that it crumbled, but why am I surprised? If that guy had like left his way for her, he was just gonna go anyway. So I was kind of happy that that happened, that it tainted her and that it changed her perspective and that she had like more compassion for the situation. Okay, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, guys. But also, why haven't you read the book by now? So what are you doing? Anyway, okay. Ngugi, will you walk me out? Ngugi hesitated. His gaze still locked on Anne for a moment before he stood. Yeah, I'll be right back, he said to in-laws and followed Anne out of the living room. Can we chat a bit? Anne led the way to Ngugi's office. The two friends stood in silence for a moment. Anne's hands were trembling inside her trouser pockets, and Ngugi was certain that the dread in his chest would suffocate him. Is she okay? Yes. Alive and well. Well, oh thank God. When he exhaled, he looked instantly refreshed. Is she leaving me? More like left you? Look, I don't know if I'm the one to put label on anything, but all I can tell you is that she got on a flight to the US yesterday. She was going to call you herself when she got there, but I hear the cops have been here already, so I thought I would come and tell you before you bring in the flying squad as well. Ngugi stared at her wordlessly for several moments. Fuck, he eventually muttered. Yeah, well... Anne shrugged. She felt bad for her friend, for both of them. I was supposed to wait until she's called you to give this to you. She handed him the envelope. Ngugi held the blue and white envelope and stared at his name, written in her old school cursive handwriting that reminded him now more than ever of the space in this world that Kavata occupied. He was scared of the letter and of the things it would release, and he was livid. She couldn't have picked a better time to do this, Anne gasped. Ngugi, seriously? Kavata has made what is easily the most difficult decision of her entire life, and you're concerned about the timing. Yes, and why shouldn't I? How long has she been planning this anyway? You're unbelievable. She spun to leave. Let me know if you need any help with the kids. All the best with everything. So what I really like there is Anne is Kavata's friend to the end. Like, that's your pal.
That's your pal.
That's your girlfriend. And like, as a woman, get you an Anne. That Chile who's like, she's not over there trying to massage his feelings, because also when is an appropriate time to leave your husband and children? What is he asking? Also, why doesn't he know he has been left?
And he was warned.
Akwende. Wajinga waliwawa. So wajinga waliwawa. I really like Anne, and I really thought that this was that was a very difficult thing for her to do, and also understanding the implications, the children. This is a guy who was her pal. Like, it's not an easy decision. There was nothing fun or interesting about that choice she had made. But I really like that. I like even in this serious moment, she still gave him a read.
Yeah.
I applaud her.
Thank you for reading. That was beautiful.
Ines.
Ines.
Ngala, Chome. Karibu sana.
Thank you.
I know you've taken time out of all the furious writing you've been doing of your thesis.
Yeah.
I think he mentioned he happens to be in his last chapter
Yeah.
Nice.
of writing.
Yeah.
So all the best to
Have
that.
a coffee, man.
Not long to go.
Yeah.
I've known you for some years now,
Yeah.
and your work has always been kind of around researching some heavy and difficult things sometimes. It's post-colonial history of Kenya.
Yeah.
And conversations with you are always very kind of interesting in this way, in the sense that when I was thinking about today's conversation, I think we're in agreement that there's a kind of history of Kenya with a capital H that is very state-sanctioned, that is very kind of nationalist in focus, and then there's a kind of people's history, right? And popular memory, and the kind of history that we remember, you know, from like 2007, for example, when we talk about our memory.
Yeah.
I don't ever foresee opening a text at the university and finding that as a center of like a history lesson about Kenya. What do you think a book like this does for growing a kind of alternative history, people's history?
Hey, let me tell you. Me, when I read this book, I was like, we need more of these books.
Yeah.
Like, we need more of these books. And as I was listening, I mean, you're right, there's not a lot of work on the PV. But also, these kind of events, a group of academics called the PV, the Kenya Crisis, in 2008. I think even before PV was gobbled up as a name.
Right.
Kenya has had many of these moments, actually, that we haven't really seen work on, or even really kind of discussed, kind of had a national discussion about it. The major one, of course, is the Mau Mau,
Yes.
right? In the 50s, which also spans, you know, the writing careers of a few writers. Ngugi, for example, is obsessed with the Mau Mau. But even that conversation, 50 years, almost 50 years later, there were still questions around, should Dedan Kimathi have a statue
Right.
in Nairobi?
Exactly.
You know, and therefore, I understand why people would struggle to make sense of these very catastrophic events. Writers or people who went through it, or both, academics even. I think it's actually the late Binyavanga who said that the defining texts of these kind of moments, usually they come maybe from another generation altogether. The defining text of the World War II came from another generation. It would probably come the kids who are now 13. So that's actually usually is usually what happens. Sad, but it's usually what happens. But it's even worse for a country like Kenya, that there's even like a policy for forgetting. You know, there's a gap. So there's actually work that will be done to suppress a memory of such events. And it's also because Kenyan history it's really, there's denial, there's amnesia, but it's really because the political class does not really want to address the original sin, you know, because it will roll back the gains that such families have made. I mean, the country's still being run by the same families from the 1960s. That tells you something. There's a lot that's at stake.
Yes.
And therefore, this policy of suppressing memory and suppressing the real history, as you put it, is a real thing. It's not that people are lazy, they don't write books or don't want to do this work. It's because someone might actually prevent you from doing so, especially in a proper manner. You know. What is this thing called now? Is it BBI or BB? It's part of that same thing of let's forget and move on without really addressing, you know, the questions that have really messed this country's history. And I think, like, from this book, when I was reading this book, I didn't know it was like the PV was a surprise. I was like, okay, that makes sense.
Right.
I really didn't expect that to be there at all, you know, because I think at some point I thought Ngugi was going to give up on his political career. And then, you know, the politics just ends, right? And then we stick to the stories of the family, or the story of the family. But then here we are, 2007, Kavata is away, and the country is basically falling apart.
Yeah.
It was so surprising, in the same way that it was surprising when the PV was happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting. As you were talking, I started to think actually about even the abbreviation itself. The fact that you can pack. I think it was like the first 100 days of 2008. They were just traumatic unfolding for a lot of people. And the fact that that can be summarized into a 3-letter abbreviation, PV, you know, and then everyone knows what you're talking about.
IDPs.
IDPs, right? And in that way, Ngala, in the way that you're saying, you know, this takes some time to document. It may even be a subsequent generation that kind of makes more sense of it than we have managed to. I was just thinking about the fact that actually something fundamental fractured. You could feel it, right? And something shifted. But in relationship also to what you were just saying about the forgetting of it being quite deliberate. I think it's Joyce Nyairu, one of our favorite quotes from Kenya at 50, her book. She talks about one of the glaring fault lines in Kenya's history isn't the absence of memory, but the institutionalization of amnesia. As a historian who's studied many phenomena, where would you place the work that has to happen now so that there's active kind of remembering?
Okay, so I think for me, really diversification of different types of intellectual labor, right? So there's a lot about this country that has been written, but it's not accessible, it doesn't belong to us, right? It's in publishers of Western universities, it's in you know, Western-based academic journals, right? Very critical kind of pieces of work that even if you go to the University of Nairobi, you might find a hard time finding. But even that is the result of a deliberate process, especially in the 80s with the Moi government, of just basically stamping onto academia and kicking, you know, great minds out of the country. So again, a very deliberate process. So, but I think that if you begin to involve artists in this kind of work, if you begin to involve fiction writers in this kind of work, journalists, so not just academics reading about
Got it.
the ills of the country. But I think academics such as myself also have a role to play to begin to have the conversations we usually have amongst ourselves with people doing other kinds of intellectual work. Because intellectual work is not a preserve of academics.
No.
Right? So artists, creatives also do a lot of intellectual labor. It might be a different form, but the concern is the same. They also think about society. They also think about the problems of the world. And it's there in their work. So I think like one way of kind of democratizing, I always use this word, democratizing history, right? Moving away from the history of capital H,
Yes.
is to involve many diverse voices and types of work into thinking about this country's history.
Yeah.
And to not forget about very important events such as the PV, and to continue to make sense of them. Yeah. Yeah.
When you talk about the multiplicity of versions, I suppose, of things, that really excites me, because I know that you're just about to finish your PhD, which means you're probably looking at teaching in the near future, aren't you?
Probably, or a career in research. But
Or a career in research.
Yeah.
So hypothetically, you are teaching in about a year's time, a couple of years.
Yeah.
You are at a public university.
Yeah.
And you are gathering material about, you know, kind of the most contemporary history of Kenya for your class.
Yeah.
Are you teaching this book?
Yeah.
Is it
Definitely.
a resource?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely. And also because the reason why, the other reason why I like this book is because the difference between this kind of work and the kind of work that I do. The kind of work that I do is very thematically driven. We think more about the themes. We think more about corruption, historical injustice, the land problem. But there are no people in our work.
Right.
This is character driven.
Right.
The book does not tell you how to think about corruption. You are seeing it there.
Right.
And it's because it's people who do these things. We forget it's people who do these things, right? And,
Right.
And you're seeing this through a family.
Yeah.
For me, I think when I texted you back after finishing the book, I said, like, look, these themes that we rail about as academics, corruption, the land problem, violence, what we call the normalization of violence, you rarely find work that talks to these themes through characters.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like film, works of fiction, this is where you can really, and when you do that, you get to the essence of the problems. You get to the essence of the problems.
Yes.
Rather than doing or reading, as in this case to my students, ask them to read a dry, boring, abstract paper on say the Goldberg scandal, right? It would be interesting to also say, which is maybe Billy Kahora's book,
Right.
who actually interviewed the guy. So, so like it's very interesting for me, and it's very powerful when you begin to talk about these big questions of society through the stories of people.
It triggered another thought, which was around curriculum.
Yeah.
And I suppose how, you know, that the design process of that entire world, and how curriculum speaks to actually where we are. So if I'm a kid in high school, Form 3, and I'm reading a set book, am I more likely to find what we've been reading for decades? Or are you finding that kind of emerging texts are finding their way into the curriculum and set books? And even though you're at at university, you're not reading.
I left high school a long time. but no, I enjoyed a book called Coming to Birth. One, because it's set in history.
Is that Marjorie?
Yeah, Oluthe. But then again, I was really struck by the characters, in the book. We have a problem in the curriculum, right?
Yeah.
And who is it? I don't want this show to be banned out. Is that we'll be watching. I think there was a book that was kicked out of the curriculum a few years ago because they suspected that there was homosexual acts.
Yes. It was called The Seagull or something.
Yeah, something like this, right? So if there's this hypersensitivity already, do you think there'll be books that are very honest like this, especially about very, very important questions like the PV? I don't know. I think it's still a struggle. Again, like I said, we are facing a country and government that where there's an official policy of suppressing memory. And that filters even in the curriculum.
Right, yes, of course.
I'm so used to hearing people say, even people like, so I write about Mombasa, and people who are actually from Mombasa, my cousins, say, no, that's not how that's not the history we were taught. Every time I talk about my work, it's like, no, but that's not the history we were taught. So what are people being taught?
And who informs that? And I think that's, for me, one of the most exciting things about this text, because the place of fiction and the way that you're able to kind of shape people's memories and thinking without having to circumvent anyone else's version, any more sort of more popular versions of events. And I guess that brings me on to my first question, actually. Sure. We've had a lot of questions around, are these people real? Is this family real? Do they exist? Because people saw themselves and saw that time in the book. But also saw a lot of what happened. And for some of them, they were triggered. So I suppose as an author, a question I'd like to ask is, should we have issued a trigger warning with a book?
Yeah. You know, when Ngala said that you didn't know it was about the violence, it wasn't apparent to you that that was going there.
No, not at all.
I've often wondered if it needed that, and I still don't have an answer. I say yes and no depending on what day of the week you ask me. But you see, the election violence is, for me, the secondary theme, or not even secondary, maybe the third or fourth or fifth, because for me it's a book about the family first, and the family going through a really traumatic point in our history that we all remember. Whether you're sitting in Runda like I was, wondering when the liquor stores are going to open so you can get a bottle of gin, or if you were covering it like Namu was, and right in that needing to, like, I wonder what it was like to actually be there. Because you must, because it's your job to report. I think 2007 must have been one of the most difficult times in the history of journalists to be a journalist, because it was difficult for me to watch, and to watch the kind of dancing around the facts that was happening, because just like it was very difficult to report. So nobody had done this before in our recent past, and it was difficult. But I don't know about the trigger warning. The reason why the book had to be so beautiful visually is because I know that the minute you enter, you're in for a ride, and like there needs to be some beauty around it. And for me, the beauty was the characters, and the scholars, and the Kavatas, and the Jains who are running campaigns but also selling clothes from Turkey. Those things were the beautiful parts. Because and that bar, Fifi's. I meant to ask you both about, actually. It
really does. And I really hope that's a history of Fifi's, because I love it.
Oh my God,
I love the
unfortunately
story.
isn't.
It's a wonderful story.
That's a good point.
Fifi's.
Yeah, Fifi's, man. We all had like moments at Fifi's, but it's that sweet spot. The book is entirely fiction, to answer that question we get over and over again. So Kavata doesn't exist, neither does Ngugi or Thuo or any of the characters there. But there's pieces of myself and everybody who has shared my space over the last 30 odd years of my existence. And that's why it resonates, because we all know, we all have an auntie who reminds us of Mrs. Woolley and vice versa. We all know Anamani. And I wanted that to be the thing that people walk away with, because people made choices, right? And we liked some of them more than we did others, but I think that I wanted to build characters that people are so attached to that at the end of the book you could sit with all of their choices and be like, I get it. It's not what I would have done, it's not what I like, but I understand, because I don't think that we understand the power of the things that we choose to do every single day.
Right.
When we think about Kenya and the ills, we think about, the leaders, to number Serikali, always, right? But like, and then now, if we had a perfect functioning governance, leadership, whatever we want to call it, would we still be where we want to be? Because I don't think we look at ourselves enough. And that's one thing to kind of bring another piece of work. Softy has shown us again, like that movie or that film showed us the fact that even if we had crisp, clean leadership, we still have a lot of work to do, because we don't assess our choices enough. We don't see that if you don't think beyond here, then you're gonna end up hurting a lot more people than you help. But all fiction. Fiction.
I suppose there is a kind of tension that a lot of people have been pointing out about like the personal versus the collective, and sort of where one's responsibility ends and when it becomes a collective responsibility when it comes to some of these choices. What's been the most surprising feedback that you've gotten from a reader?
I think it has to be the Kavata, the backlash for Kavata. That has been visceral. Okay. Like people do not like Kavata.
So very strong feelings about her.
Very strong feeling about her, and of course about Amani's death. Two things that probably, those two characters, honestly, actually, were probably the most difficult for me to write. Yeah. The editor kept sending me back to work on Kavata. But like, she's not convincing. I don't trust her. I don't believe her decisions. I don't believe that she's purely as voiceless as she is. And I kept telling my editor, Kavata is doing this for the first time. She's never been a politician's daughter. She's doing this. She's doing life for the first time. So you don't need to understand her. You need to understand that the people who are in your life will very, very often make choices you don't like, and you need to be able to see past those. And by people who are in your life, I mean your leaders and your, because we're not a very old country. We haven't been in this thing for long. So like
57?
57, we're only, it's just we don't know what we're doing, and we're learning. But I think that sometimes where we want better, we must also allow grace where grace is needed. And with Kavata, I wish there was more grace around her, because I love all my characters the most. Kavata and Amani were the most difficult ones, because the pain that I know they were going through that I could not access. I don't know what it's like to leave your husband and your family. I don't know that. And I had to keep trying to put myself in her shoes and be like, what choices must you, how many spreadsheets must you have to do this? And Amani, of course, because he's a child, and all of it, I have a nephew who's exactly Amani's age, or at least was at the point I was writing it, and having to like think about my love for Adrian, my nephew, and then have to imagine a place where a boy like that would then just die so senselessly was it's difficult. I mean, you know how I would be like, you call you in tears, because I'm editing and I'm so sad, but I can't really share the sadness because those things were very, very real. So I have to also remind myself that it's fiction often.
And what's your writing process?
Research is my foundation. And with everything, as you know, we spend more hours on research at Book Bank than on most things we do. We love it. We love it, and it grounds our it grounds our work. And research was this for me. This was not the book that I wanted to write. We were talking about this on the way here. This was not the book that I intended to write when I moved away to write. This book chose me, and it wouldn't release me until it was finished. And the reason this happened is because when I moved to Cape Town to enroll in UCT and to do my master's, my father had just passed. I was sad. Nairobi was suffocating. My sister had left. I was like, I'm going away. And I went to write this memoir about my dad, and I wasn't ready because I was still grieving. But as I got there, everybody who noticed my accent was be like, where are you from? Zimbabwe? No, Kenya, yes. Oh, Kenya, shame. Oh, shame. So bad. So sad what you guys have been through. This is 5 years on, right? It's 5 years after post-election violence. And I'm just like, we're fine. We'd be like, how are you guys doing? We're okay. We're fine. Accept, move on. I drank the Kool-Aid, right? And I'm here just trying to try to move on, but it came up so often, even in like my grad school seminars, it was coming up. And like, who's writing about it? And what are you guys, what is out there about this period in your time? And there was very little. There was lots of reports and lots of articles and lots of material. I remember Boni's exhibition of the pictures from the
Kenya Burning.
Kwani also.
Kwani did
it. Kenya Burning published Kenya Burning. So there was material, but I hadn't read this. I hadn't read. I had read the Kibera story, very journalistic. Whatever. It was very much nonfiction, very much reporting from the TRC and all of the TGRC. I confuse those two. TGRC. So 6 to 8 months after reading everything I could get my hands on and watching the news from that period, I was convinced that there had to be a story that needed to be told. And some characters I'd known for a long time, like I think Thuo, Ngugi, and Chepto I've known the longest. I've known since I was a teenager. I've been writing them into my short stories. So I placed them there, and and then they went, and the story kind of emerged, but it was never the thing that I wanted to. And so the process starts with research, and then I just trust it. I put characters in the place where it's the most difficult to recreate, because a lot of things I didn't have to recreate. Kemba happened. These things happened. They happened. was just about.
Brilliantly told. Also.
Yeah, thank you.
That was a
I mean,
very
horrible.
cool
It was
perspective.
tough,
Yes.
but brilliantly told.
Yeah.
Tough read.
And that was probably the most out of body experience, to be honest. I used to roll my eyes at writers when they talk about like the thing that happens when you go, because I know I had to talk about Kiamba, but I just didn't know who, who's a strong enough character to go take us through it. And like, will they have an opinion? What will they do? Like these people that I have created, if we put them in Eldoret, what would they do?
Right.
And only Chepto was the one I trusted to have just show us. And that's the thing, she showed us. She showed us a version of it.
Yeah, but it's amazing. Sorry, Angela.
No, it's fine.
Please.
But it's amazing how it doesn't. To hear that you actually thought about, like, I should have Kiamba, but it doesn't feel like that when you read the story. It just feels it just gels. It's very natural. It doesn't feel like it was thought about. It was just put there. You know. I think I think for me that's actually the power. Yeah. So I saw it. I was like, yeah, of course this is Kiamba, but wow, this is how it could have happened. This is probably how it happened.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It was a kind of same experience for me, because I found myself actually going back, because I'd forgotten about Kiamba, like the details. And when I read that part, I was like, actually, what happened? So I had to kind of go back and research it a bit more. Did you guys have any moments like that when reading it? Where it triggered something and you're like, actually, what happened to DRC?
When you went back to Google to be like, hey, what happened to
what
this
happened
guy?
for the Kiamba thing?
Kiamba, for me,
Yeah, I sort of know. Those guys were actually released, right? So they were taken to court, and there was no evidence.
There was no
right?
evidence.
Am I right to? Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah. But for me, I thought the train.
The train.
That is, I actually I didn't know anything about that.
Exactly.
Yeah, but also was like, it's true. I don't know. Yeah.
The train route is accurate, and somebody challenged me on this, and I'm just like, because I have a little journal where every single thing I printed is stuck like a scrapbook. So I remember mapping those journeys out because I really wanted to paint a country of like a picture of what was happening across. Yes, So the train locations are as accurate as I remember them to be, because we did do a lot of fact checking as well, but the conversation wasn't. And and then I had stories about like cargo trains being used for passengers in that time and all of that. So it's interesting what sticks. When you read something on the internet or wherever when you're researching, because in Kiamba, for instance, what stuck for me was that people were watching. Like people watched, like not that somebody would ban, but like people would
that there was an audience.
Yes. And I remember for months being obsessed about like how many were there, what were they wearing, were there men, were there women, were there children? Like did they know what was happening? Did they think it was just like these are the things that haunted me? So there's things like that, like little small details that you kind of you hold on to, and then you kind of don't let go of until you find out where you are way past them.
So on Facebook, on Instagram, and on Twitter, just search for Wanjiru Koinange. Her debut novel is published by Bank Books, and you can follow Bank Books online as well, on Twitter, on Facebook, and on Instagram. Just search for Bank Books, that's BUNK Books. Thank you very much for continuing to buy this title. Just this week, we found out actually that it's number 2 in terms of best-selling novels, best-selling books this year at Textbook Center. We are thrilled to be introducing the ebook version of the Havoc of Choice, which is now available on Amazon. If you still wish to grab a copy of it in print, which is my preference as well, you can have it delivered to your home via Textbook Center by visiting their website, which is textbookcenter.com, or grab a copy in store. We are also available at the beckon of a button. So this book is available on Glovo and on Jumia as well. Happy reading! Cut.